Okay. Sorry. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining, as always. So I said that we would like to begin with some words of tribute. I say this with all due humility, in the sense that I'm aware of the fact that there are in our Kehillah, especially people who have had decades and decades and decades of incredibly close connection with the Dayan and what that, and everything that entails in terms of themselves, their families. I'll share a little bit about my connection in a moment, but I think what is especially important to acknowledge from the perspective of our Kehillah, something which I'm sure will be spoken about in other occasions, other forums, is simply the fact that the amount that he did for this Kehillah since the very, very earliest days, in this very inception of the Kehillah, he was a tremendous supporter, and really did so much to enable and help this Kehillah become what it is. Along the way, at every stage of the journey, he was always there. And that's something which is just in a pure sense of Toras Chaim, the debt that we owe to him is immense. On a personal level, I entered the rabbinate obviously quite a long time after he'd already retired from the London Beis Din. He still had a very significant and prominent role in the Beis Din and all Beis Din activities in many different ways. I remember shortly after becoming shortly after becoming Rav, there was a chalitza at the Beis Din, and I remember Diane being present for that and running that's such a rare occurrence, so he was very much seen in that light as the figure of and the head in that way of the Beis Din, but also the impact that he had on wider Kehillah in terms of the Anglo Jewry, in terms of and far beyond. I can see now through what I'm doing in the Beis Din, you see the legacy, you see the impact that he had in so many areas. It's just incredible. And then there's a situation where most people, they get to a certain stage in their lives, and then they sort of take a back seat. And Diane, when he retired from the London Beis Din, when he retired as Rosh Beis Din, he went on to a sort of global level. So he became, basically when in Europe, we used to go to conferences in Europe, the Conference of European Rabbis, and it was incredible to see the cover that he was given. He was basically the Rosh Beis Din of Europe. That's what they used to call him. He was the senior posek in the whole of Europe, and he used to regularly, after retirement, he used to go to Germany and do Gerus and Gittin, and that's what he did. And it was just incredible to see someone of relatively advanced age, yet doing so much more and involved in so much more than someone much younger would do. An incredible example in so many ways. I saw a Hamek Dover in this week's Parsha, which I think really brings this home so powerfully. Perek Chavov Posuk Chov Dalet. There's very little, as we've spoken about in previous years. There's very little spoken about Yitzchak in the Torah. There's really little in terms of, even this parsha is the only parsha which is really about Yitzchak, and even that's not really about Yitzchak, But the center point of the parsha, where you have the unusual issue with the wells, and they pick the wells, the significant of all the wells, and Abban things talks about this, what the wells mean. And after that, you have a pasuk, Layal Misham Be'er Shava. They went to Be'er Shava, Vayiro Elov Hashem, and it says that Hashem appeared to him. It says Hashem appeared to him. Balayla Ahu, that night, pasuk of Dalaviyom, and he says, Anochi Elokei Avram Avicha, I am the God of Avram your father. Al Tirok Yitzchak Anochi. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you. Basically, I will increase your descendants. For the sake of Avraham, my servant. Avraham Avdi. And the question is, what exactly does this mean? What does it refer to? What does it mean that I will bless you? What does it mean in this context? And what does it mean? Ba'avur Avraham Avdi, for the sake of Avraham, my servant. And the Tziv says it can't be that it's talking about in quantity, because at the end of the day, whatever Avram received, that's also applied to Yitzchak. So what does it mean that he received more in that sense, or at least the Hirbesi Azaracha? a quantity thing, because Avraham already had that, and that was passed on to Yitzchak. And he says it also can't be in terms of wealth, because Yitzchak had already been blessed in that way. And he also says that it's not it wouldn't be able to say that this was what he was afraid of when it says Al Tiro, do not be afraid, because that was why he left Gerar. That's why he's come now to Beersheba. He left there because he was worried about there was a kin, or there was a jealousy over him in Gerar, but not where he is now in Beersheba. And also, what does it mean, Avra Ba'avur, for the sake of Avram, my servant? So he says, and the problem is like this, is that Ba'avur always implies the Tovoso. So it's for the benefit of Avram. And that's a question, a problem. How can it be? How is it going to be that what it transpires to Yitzchak is going to be Ba'avur Avraham Avti, for the sake of Avram, my servant? How is that? What does that mean? How is that going to work? How is it Tovola Avraham in Shomayim? Avraham is already, what does it mean it's going to be a Tova for Avraham? Because of the wealth of his descendants. And he says, it doesn't mean that at all. He says, Hu bracha chadosha, the Netziv says, it's a new bracha. This is a completely new bracha given to Yitzchak, that he will cause his descendants to become great through their learning Torah, and there will be, so to speak, a thread of grace upon them as a result. And that will save them at the time of Tzara through the greatness they will become in Torah. As it says, he brings Pirkei Avos, Kol HaMakabel Olav Torah, etc., etc. You get released from other things if you learn Torah. And he says that Hashem, Her HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ovis B'Zeh Mokum, Shehayakov Oz Osek B'Alei Torah. This was the place that Yaakov would, with time, come to learn Torah in this place, and that was the Ziv and the Hodor of Be'er Sheva, right? Because again, if you look at Parshas Vayetze, beginning, the very famous Rashi, beginning of Parshas Vayetze Yaakov Be'er Sheva, when a tzaddik leaves, Rashi says, Pona Ziva, Pona Hadora, you leave the splendor, and that splendor, that was what was taking place in Be'er Sheva. So Yitzchak has arrived in Be'er Sheva. That is the place where Yaakov the light, if you like, will go out from that place through what Yaakov, his son, will do there, the learning he will do, what the difference he will make. And that's, he says, is the meaning of Ba'avur Avraham Avti. Because says the Netziv, Ki b'shor shetalmid chacham b'menucha hoigim matoras rabban v'yesh mizeh nachas lohem ba'olam ha'elyon. Because when Talmidei Chachamim learn the Torah of their Rebbe, they learn the Torah that they learned from their Rebbe. In other words, their Rebbe who's passed away, the Rav who's passed away, right? That gives them nachas in the Olam Ha'elyon. He brings the Gemara, which says, Dovev Sifsei Yeshenim. If you say the words of Talmidei Chachamim, that causes their lips to move, so to speak, in the kever. And he says, V'Yaakov Avinu Yoshev b'Yeshiva, and he was doile umashke mitoroso shel Avraham Avinu. And what he did was, in Beersheva, this is beautiful words, he says, that he drew from and he learned the words of Torah of Avraham Avinu. V'zelo hoya efsha elo biyoso b'Beersheva b'krach. This was impossible, except the only place he could do this, the only place he could learn, so to speak, the Torah of Avraham Avinu was in Be'er Sheva. Why? Because Umotza Anoshim She'eskairu. That was where he found all those people that Avraham Avinu had converted. V'lamdem Torah Avraham, and he taught them the Torah of Avraham. You know, where did he find a chavrusa? Where did Yaakov find a chavrusa? How could Yaakov be learning so long in Be'er Sheva by himself? The answer is no. He found all those people that Avraham was makarev, right? And he taught them Torah, v'lamdem Torah Avraham, v'hoya bazeh nachas ruach Avraham. And that was what gave nachas ruach to Avraham Avinu. And he finishes off with the words of Ma'aseh Avos Siman Nabonim. That's how we have to conduct ourselves as well. So this beautiful Netziv transforms this posuk into something totally different. He says that the reassurance given to Yitzchak is that this is the place where your legacy, effectively, will be confirmed. This is the place where Yaakov Avinu will sit and learn, right? And this is the V'hir Beisi Ezaracha. I will increase your descendants, not in wealth, but in their chokhmah, in Torah. This is where they will commit themselves to that. This is where Yaakov will do so. But Avur Avraham Avdi, and that will give tremendous nachas to Avraham, who is my servant. So I think in the context of paying tribute to Dayan Aaron, we really see this as an incredibly powerful words of this Netziv, because the ultimate legacy for someone who was so multifaceted and was such a shining example of what it means to be a Rov, to be a manhig, to be a leader, to set an example in so many different ways. The greatest legacy is what he leaves behind in all of those places that he touched and had an impact, whether it was through the Beis Din, whether it was through the wider work in Europe, through his kehillah, through our kehillah, through all the kohelim that he established, which are having an incredible impact. The concept of the community kollel. You see, for example, in Edgware, the impact that the kollel in Edgware has had on the whole kehillah, and that the Bourne Wood kollel is now having as well. Just putting that at the heart and center. And you saw, as he spoke about in the Levite, you saw when he used to learn Torah, and he gave Shurim, how much how much he gave him, how much chiyus it gave him. I had this chus just before we began to went into him to take Eitzah from him, to talk to him before we began in this kehillah, and also before Rosh Hashanah in that very difficult COVID era, where he provided very particular and incredibly important guidance on what we should do as a kehillah during those very difficult. It seems such a long time ago, and of course after the Yom Kippur that year, that's when he had the stroke. But our responsibility always is to ensure that we continue his legacy in this way, and through what we do, through the lives we lead, through the actions that we take, and his neshama should have an aliyah. So shares other ideas on the parsha. The contrast. Let's just try and focus on the contrast between Yaakov and Esau. If you look at the pasuk, well, slightly just an idea before we get to actually Yaakov and Esau. There's a beautiful contrast between Rashi and the Ramban at the beginning of the parsha. They actually complement each other. It says that Rivka was Matelech Lidroshes Hashem. The Rivka goes to ask Hashem, right? Right? She says, and she goes to Matelech Lidroshes Hashem. Termim came, why is this that I am Matelech? And she went Lidroshes Hashem to seek Hashem. Now, the question is, what does it mean? Vatelech lidroshes Hashem. And Rashi understands lebeis midrash shel Shem, that she went to the base medrash of Shem ve'ever. In other words, she went to take advice. Lama ze anochi, why is this happening to me? Why is this occurring to me? And she goes, and therefore her solution is to go and seek advice from the base medrash of Shem and Ever. The Ramban says, very, very brief Ramban at the end of this pasuk of base, vatelech lidroshes Hashem. Loshin Rashi. So it's the next Rashi. She yagid lo mate b'sofa. What does it mean lidroshes to seek Hashem? So they should tell her what's going to be, what is going to happen with this difficulty that she's experiencing in terms of her internal struggles and what's going on with the twins inside her. V'lo matzosi drisha eitz Hashem, says the Ramban, rak lehispalel. But he says if you look through the Torah, you don't see the words lidrosh, to seek, in the context of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, except in the context of tefillah, right? Okay, Ketam dorashti es Hashem va'aneni. I seek Hashem and He answers me. Dorshuni, seek me v'chiu and live. Chayoni im edrosh lachem. If I seek, these are all examples where the seeking of Hashem is dafka in the context of tefillah. I suppose another example which comes to mind is the Haftarah for Tanis, Dirshu Hashem be'motzoi, seek Hashem, right? So the idea is in the context of tefillah. So the idea I saw is that there is the Rashi, although the Ramban seems to argue with Rashi on the explanation here of the pasuk, in truth, the two approaches complement one another, because often when we have dilemmas and we have a difficulty as to what to do and how to behave, we need always both. It's not often, it's always. We need to complement each other. So vatelech lidroshes Hashem. On the one hand, we have to take advice, as Rivka did. You have to take advice, find out direction, but also you have to realize as well that it's the same word that means to daven. So in other words, the same word to be doresh, to seek out when you ask advice, right? We use the same word for davening when you're talking in the context of Hashem, lidroshes Hashem. So it's very powerful because it's the same word. It's not that we have you give someone advice and you say, oh, yes, you should get advice on this matter, right? Say something, yeah. And by the way, you should also daven. No, it's the same word. The drisha is the same word. In other words, it focuses you together on the same the same issue to make sure that one always does both of these approaches at the same time.
When it comes to L,
yeah,
not use this word as well.
Yes.
That's not necessary to fill it.
I think it must be made when it was a posuk in the context of a posuk. But Dirshua Hashem behimot sa'oi. Seek Hashem when he is found is referring to the Aseret Tshuva. So there is that concept there. Yeah. Okay. You're saying maybe broader than so, but certainly tefillah is at the heart of it as well. Yeah. Fair point. So, what does it mean when it says Yoshev Oholim? So Yaakov is referred to as a Yoshev Oholim. So Rashi says, this is at the end of Pasuk of Zion. Rashi says, he learned Torah. He learned Torah, but there are other approaches in terms of what those words mean. To be a Yoshev Oholim, to sit in tents. What does that mean? If you look at the Targum, so the Targum says, Yaakov Gvar Shlim. Yaakov is a complete person. Mashamish Beis Ulfana. Now, Mashamish Beis Ulfana really means to serve in a school, really a house of learning, school, right? Ulpan. Yeah, in modern Hebrew, Ulpan is a school, and Mashamish really means to serve, not serve as in serve the drinks, but as in be part of and learn and be a part of that in an educational sense. So that takes it slightly beyond, if you like. Rashi, what Rashi is saying, in the sense that Rashi says he was in the tent of Shem and Ever, perhaps the Targum Onkelos is referring more to the active aspect of what Yaakov is doing, whether that's in the sense of learning, whether it's in the sense of teaching. But the Radak goes further. There's a fascinating Radak, which is not in the Omicron, it might mean some editions of the Cross Kedolos, it's not in the standard one. The Radak says, V'oma oyalim loshen rabim. It says oyalim in the plural. Ki hoyalo made im kol chacham sheyamotzi im zeh ve'im zeh. He would learn with every chacham he would find, with both whoever he would find, he would learn from. Ki kol cheftzoi hayabozeh, because his entire desire, everything that drove him, was for this purpose. There was no guile, there was no sin, there was nothing in him that was trying to trick anyone. But all he was interested in was learning the emes. So what the Radak does is the Radak points and looks at the word oholim in the plural. What do you mean Yoshev Oholim? He was Yoshev Oil. He learned Torah. He sat in the tent. No, Yoshev Oholim, because he was someone who was willing to learn from everyone, and he took from this chacham and he took from that chacham, and that's his path to greatness, because he was able to do that, right? We know that it's a tremendous attribute if a person is able, like the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Halomin Mikol Adam, if you're able to learn, and certainly in a Torah context as well, if you're able to understand that the Torah is like a diamond and it's multifaceted, and if you learn, and you do learn different things from different people and different teachers and different rebbeim, different rabbis. It's a very, very important aspect of one's life. If one wants to leave, or one wants to achieve a both to be grounded and well-rounded in terms of their approach to learning, it's a tremendous milah to be able to take different things from different people, and also different mahalchim, different directions and different perspectives. That's a tremendously positive thing. That's what the Radak understands of Yoshev Oholim. It's a beautiful, beautiful idea. The Keramat Tzvi, going much later on in the parsha, Ratzvi Ashverba, he looks at another real challenge, if you like, when Esau, in understanding this, an aspect of Yaakov's character, but in fact he resolves this in a beautiful way. When Yaakov is challenged, or at least when Esau is shocked about the brachas, so it says, so the pasuk says in pasuk Lamed Hey, Yaakov responds and says, Perich of Zion pasuk Lamed Hey, Vayomer, and he said, Bo achicha b'mirma, vayikach birchosecha. So your brother came b'mirma, exactly what the Radak says. He wasn't with Yaakov, right? So it's one of the things we have to understand. Bo achicha b'mirma, vayikach birchosecha, and he took your brachas. So this word b'mirma. So if you look at Rashi says one word, b'chochma. That's interesting. right? Because why is it b'chokhmah? The Kerem Tzvi says is when do we ever find that mirma, which immediately means guile or deceit? Where does that ever mean chokhmah? What is clever about it? I mean, you could say that a person who acts with guile is also clever, but why is it? Why is he translating b'chokhmah? Right? Why is that? Why is that the translation of the word in this way? Mirma? And it's the same as the. It's really different. It's the Targum. The Targum says the same thing. With wisdom. Chokhmah, chokhmah means like we take normally as if you to do it with chokhmah means you've done a wise act. Yeah, it's exactly it seems to be a positive, right? Not a negative. So how are you to understand how Rashi understands this pasuk? And he brings I think a few different different explanations, but the one I want to show you is let me just find it. Yeah, so he says that here it is. Says the Kerem Tzvi, if Yaakov would tell his father Hanhogas Esav B'noi, the way Esav his son conducted himself, and the way he conducted himself in the real life he was living towards everyone, towards Hashem, towards people, and how he sold the Bechorah and everything else for the Lechem and the Zidadoshim, right? He scorned the Bechorah. Also, Yitzchak would have nothing to do with him. He would completely distance himself from every bracha. All the terrible things that he did, and murder, and all these things that Chazal tell us he was involved in. Yaakov's chokhmah was he didn't want to do any more than was necessary to disturb the shalom of his father's household. Okay, and as a result, what he wanted to do was he had to do what was necessary, as you know, guided by Rivka. He had to do, but what he had to do was necessary in order to receive what was his al-pi din, as we know, because the Esau was possible from receiving those brachas and the bechorah and everything else, etc., etc. But he says that that what he wanted to do was in order. It was b'chokhmah in the sense that it was clever in the sense that it was the right thing that had to be done in terms of the Torah. It was his requirement. He needed to do this. It wasn't appropriate for Esav to get it, but he chose the pathway. Bocha l'shanos, he says, he chose to change so that he would not need to talk about the selling of the Bechorah and everything Esav had done, because then he would definitely have been Mavarech Yaakov B'leiv Shalem. You see, what he's trying to say is like this. If you look at the parsha, you see that just understanding the psukim, that Yaakov, the risk that Yaakov takes, obviously, in the way he goes about it, is that Yitzchak is going to have quite a negative view of what Yaakov has done. That's at least on the surface, right? Until obviously it's explained to him, and he realizes, Chazal explained many times, he saw Gehinnom that was open underneath Esav, so it was revealed to him that it needed to be this way. But the risk that Yaakov takes is effectively risking his whole relationship with his father, and the fact that his father will say, "How could you do this?" etc., etc. But he did this with Bnei HaShalom. So in order not to reveal the disgrace of Esav to his father in full, and that was the chokhmah that he used. The chokhmah was, that's why the mirma is chokhmah, because it was chokhmah in the sense, it was the path of minimal disruption, the only way that he could minimally disrupt the relationship between Esav and his father. And you actually see that in the psukim. You see that Esav still has that relationship with Yitzchak. There's a lot more to say on the subject, but that's what you still see from there. And therefore what we see is, and this is really just finish with this in terms of the contrast between Yaakov and Esau. If you look at the Kliyokar, Perek Chov Zayin, Posuk Lamed Vov, just right here actually, in the same place. Why is it that it says B'chorosi lokach, v'nei ato lokach berchosi? So Esau reveals it. Is this why he calls him Yaakov? Because he took my b'chora and now he's taken my bracha? Says the Kliyokar. Why does it say he took the b'chora with Ramia, with deceit? Surely he sold it Mirotzon Tov. He sold it. Esau sold it, but why is he complaining? But why do you think? So he says the answer is because, in other words, the Kliyokar asks, just because Esau was mavaza the b'chora, scorned it, what did Yaakov do wrong? At the end of the day, he sold it willingly, right? So he says like this: that Esau said one is dependent on the other. Because when Yitzchak asked him, "Who are you?" and he answered, "I'm Esau, your firstborn," how could he say? How could Yaakov say this? It ostensibly is not true. I'm in place of Esau, your firstborn, because I bought the firstborn, right? I'm in his place. And if he hadn't bought the bechora, he couldn't answer Anochi Esau b'cherecha, and he wouldn't be able to come into the brachas, right? So in other words, he was saying that when he bought the bechora, this is going through Esau's head, that the time when he bought the bechora, he must have intended to all this to happen. This is Esau's conclusion, right? Because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to say, I am Esau, your firstborn. He must have intended all this to happen, okay? And that's why he now complains about the bechora being taken, because he says, now I think it's a mekach tov. Now I think it's a full sale. Because at the beginning, I thought there's not very much to this bechora. What's to the bechora, right? Remember the Medrash says at the beginning that he says to Yaakov, well, what's in it anyway? And he says, well, you've got all these responsibilities. I don't want all these responsibilities, right? So that's what he thinks, right? So, and the way Kliyokar explains it is, I'm just saying outside because it's short on time. He says, the Kliyokar says that he says to him, well, at the end of the day, maybe my father's not going to leave anything anyway. So maybe this bechora isn't worth anything. It's better that I have the suit, right? It's effectively, right? But now he says, I see how much the bechora is worth, because the brachas are dependent on the bechora, okay? Because otherwise Yaakov would not have said, Anochi Esau b'cherecha, I am Esau your firstborn, to get the brachas. So he realizes that actually the two are all linked. That's what Esau realizes, to it together. Okay, and it must be that that's why Esau says he's now deceived me. Right, and that's why he says now he's deceived me twice. Okay, in other words, this is the revelation Esau now has, that actually it wasn't just that. This is the way he sees it. But when he sold me the soup, and he took the bechora, what he was really doing was also taking all this with it. What do you see from here? Vayivez Esav es habechora. Esav is the exact opposite of Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu is someone who thinks very carefully before he acts. He's Yoshev Oholim. He learns from everyone, every individual person. He thinks, what can I gain from this person? What can I gain from this person? He bides his time. He acts for chokhmah. He doesn't jump into something and just say to his father, look how terrible Esav is, and therefore you need to give me the brachas. No, on the contrary, b'chokhmah, he thinks very carefully. What do I need to reveal? What do I not need to reveal? And Esav is the exact opposite. He jumps into selling the bechor without even really understanding what it is. So that here he regrets the whole thing when he finally works out, actually, it was much more than I thought it was, and obviously there's more to it, discussing how that works and the link between the two. But it's the complete contrast between someone who acts without thought, bli machshava, that leads to vayivez Esav es habechora, because it's just quick and he just acts on the spur of the moment. Whereas Yaakov is someone who thinks through everything, is a well thought through person, and that's how he results in being Yaakov Avinu. So thanks for joining. Okay, have a good Shabbos. Everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, good Shabbos.
Thank you very much.
Good Shabbos.